Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Boxscore Geeks Show. I am Patrick Mitten, otherwise known on Twitter as NBA Geek. I am joined this week by he's usually the voice of God, but today he is both the voice and the face of God in the studio production booth. That is Brian Foster, who is, I think, this way.
That's right, yeah, our lovely studios here, our lovely Skype
lovely studios here in Burbank, California, I think.
That's where most studios are,
somewhere that sounds really sexy and they do things on TV. I don't know. Anyway, that's Brian Foster. He is Boxscore Brian on Twitter. And absent between us, I think we have a placeholder image of where our lovely host Dre usually sits. And Dre can't join us this week because he's in Vegas. Hopefully, I assume he's winning crap loads of money doing fantasy basketball or baseball or poker or what. I assume he's just winning gobloads of money. I mean, that's what he usually does. I guess if I was there, that's what he usually does when he's there. Exactly. So anyway, we're going to do this without him, and today we're going to talk a little bit about. We're going to talk about last week's poll, of course. We're going to talk a little bit about. We're going to talk about the Avengers, to be honest, because we're that dorky. We're going to talk a little bit about the very few transactions that have happened in the NBA this week. And we're going to talk a little bit about some changes we made on the website, and we're going to talk a little bit about Scott Walker and how much we all hate him. Anything else we're going to talk about? I think that pretty much covers the. Yeah,
maybe a couple of shout outs, but we've got some good stuff.
That's a given. We'll shout out some people. And let's get right into it. Last week's poll, we asked you if you thought poker or Defense of the Ancients was more of a, which one was more of a sport? And the poll was pretty much overwhelmingly in favor of Defense of the Ancients. 97 to 54 is how it currently stands. And to me, that kind of makes sense because, I mean, you can play poker if you're 75 and you can barely see, but you can't play Defense of the Ancients at a professional level unless you have absolutely amazing fast twitch motor reflexes. So feels like one's more of a sport than the other, and I mean, obviously I'm just completely ignoring the strategy part, which I don't really want to get into arguments about which one requires more strategy, because I'm sure that both intellectually challenging games, but it seems like there's a threshold of physical ability that you have to meet to be great at Defense of the Ancients, and my guess is that threshold is really, 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 really high. And this comes from a guy who I played Warcraft 3, and I remember I would just completely crush all my friends playing in a local, basically my win record against my friends in local area network games was 99 out of 100. I was by far the best. But if I got on a BattleNet, some 14-year-old kid would crush me in minutes, right? And I don't know, I got decent fast twitch motor reflexes and stuff like that, but I got to, I guess, I don't even know what the relevant numbers are, but I got to level 20, online in BattleNet, which at the time was pretty good. I'm guessing it's the 70th percentile or something on BattleNet, but still, I got to some level where I would get crushed constantly until I got matched up with somebody who was terrible, and then I would crush them, and then I'd kind of get bumped back up into the level where they crushed me constantly, and that's when I just kind of gave up the sport, if you want to call it a sport. And I'm sure Defense of the Ancients is even more so crazy dependent on your ability to your fast twitch reflexes, and also your ability to just keep calm under pressure and perform at a high level under pressure, because you're kind of constantly under pressure.
Well, it's very similar, of course.
Some of that seems relevant in poker, because I will say the difference between the good poker players and the fantastic poker players is that the fantastic poker players, they never tilt, they never get emotional, they take bad beats in stride, they don't care, they just move on to the next one, they basically don't make decisions based on emotion.
And Daniel Negreanu, who Dre has pictured for the poll here, is a good example of that. Steady guy. But no, it's
pretty much, I mean, speaking of a guy who actually made his living in cash, my respect for guys who have made tons of money playing tournament poker is a little bit lower.
Oh, interesting. Not as much to lose, I guess, in a tournament.
No, that's not it. It's just tournament play is totally different than cash game play, and like Phil Hellmuth is a classic example of a player who's amazing in tournaments. But I don't know if you ever watched High Stakes Poker back when they did on what show was on. It was, I forget what network it was on. It was like 7 or 8 years ago. Maybe they still do it, where they had like the game that where it was $1 million cash buy-in, and they would just play a cash game. And yeah, when Helmuth bought into that game, all the cash game players were like, "Oh yeah, here we go." They were really
Because he's
excited
known
to
for
see
going on
it.
tilt, right, and getting emotional is why.
I don't. Yeah, that and plus he just doesn't play the cash game well at all. He plays a style of poker that is pretty well suited to tournaments, but is extremely unsuited towards cash game because he tends to take advantage. He's amazingly good at taking advantage of all the mistakes that people in tournaments make. But if you sit down at a table full of guys who play cash games regularly, they just don't make those mistakes. And so your game suddenly becomes this. If you still try to play that style where you're trying to force people into those crazy mistakes, like a classic example is he will bet very small into a big pot with a really wide range of hands. And in tournaments, people are just like, "What the fuck does that mean?" And they kind of just react very poorly to it and do the wrong thing. Whereas in cash games, players know players who know how to play poker know pretty well how to respond to that. Hint: you just pretend he checked, and it just kind of like it, you know, because it gets to the point where okay, if you're betting really tiny into a pot with a huge range of hands, but you would also check into the same pot with a huge range of hands, both strong and weak. All you're really doing is paying money to check, right? And so, it kind of gets to be a ridiculously exploitable strategy. But anyway,
Poker tips for free here on the Boxscore Geeks show this week. Well, no, but the reason we're talking about the poll a little bit more this week is because of the comments, actually. I made a little bit of a joke there in the comments that, yeah, see, this is me here, Charlie from Always Sunny. But anyway, no, I made a joke. I brought up the Dave Barry theory of movie reviews, which I think he's also joking a little bit when he brought this up originally. But it's that Avengers is always the best picture every year because it makes the most money, right? So
right.
I brought this joke up again. I said I voted for poker, which I actually did. But, you know, and for those who are watching along online, you know, you can see John Floyd's comment here, but I'll read it out for the audio listeners. He calls it the Ayn Rand theory of movie reviews. I think he's joking too. He tends to joke a little bit in the comments. But Dre actually got interested in this conversation. So yeah, we're going to tease a little bit. More to come from Dre. Maybe even an article, he was saying. Maybe just comments, we'll see, on this whole effect of sort of if something's popular and it makes a lot of money, does that give it intrinsic value over the artistic value or whatever? So anyway, that's for the future.
Yeah, it is for the future, and in particular, I don't want to get into this Ayn Rand versus Avengers or theory of movie reviews because
should they try to recruit her as an Avenger, maybe?
Well, the thing I don't want to get into is that I feel like Dre has a very significant contribution to make to this discussion, and I don't want to preempt him. I don't want to air out the discussion this week in some watered down form, and then next week he won't be able to talk about it because we've already talked about it and we won't want to rehash.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is
so anyway. I think there's stuff coming up in a future podcast about that.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, right? So anyway, that was last week's poll, and this week we're actually gonna talk a little bit about basketball, right?
Absolutely.
Basketball things are happening. So last weekend, I finally got a chance to sit down with it. So this has been, like, I would say the number one contact request I get on my site all the time is people are like, you know, I went onto your site and I added up the expected wins produced, and it's like this colossally huge number. So the wins produced metric must be bullshit, because if there's only 1,230 wins to go around and your site says all the expected wins add up to 1,500, then clearly you're doing something wrong. And the answer is yes, I was totally doing something wrong, but it's not the formula's fault, because what was wrong here were the inputs that we're putting into the formula, which is the positions. So the wins produced formula is built on the concept that every team has a small forward, a power forward, a shooting guard, a center, and a point guard. And in order for the wins produced formula to add up to like a number that explains wins, you have to actually allocate the minutes played evenly amongst those positions. And as Dave very often says, you can't just have everyone play center. You can't put you can't put 5 Tyson Chandlers out on the floor and expect to win. So if you looked at our numbers, because I get like the position, I don't watch every game, and in fact, all of us together, you, me, Trey, we collectively don't even watch every game.
We
Like
failed the eye test.
These position allocations are not based on Patrick watching the Bucks play the Bulls and say, geez, totally looked like Jared Dudley played power forward there, so I'm going to write that down. That's not how it works, folks. I'm afraid it's all done by a computer, and we trust various sources like box scores about like who played where, and it turns out most of that is bullshit, because there's plenty of box scores that'll list, for example, 4 people that played power forward or small forward or shooting guard or whatever, and where all of their minutes collectively add up to way more than 48 in any given game. But according to the formula, in any given game, there's only a shooting guard on the floor for 48 man minutes, right? And sure, there's position overlap. Sometimes you have a small forward and a shooting guard who are both on the floor, and they're kind of doing similar things, and they're really kind of playing the same position. But then, according to the formula, or the basis of the formula is that at some point, they're kind of trading off, like, who has to do what. But at some point, somebody has to defend the opposing guy's bigger wing player, and somebody has to, defend the wing player that's posting up. Or if you're talking about centers versus power forwards versus small forwards, you're talking about the quote-unquote small ball discussion. At some point, somebody has to grab rebounds, somebody has to block shots, somebody has to defend the opposing guy who's 7 feet tall, etc. So there's always this idea that even if you've got 2 guys who are quote-unquote interchangeable, that what that really means is that each of them is spending 50% of their time at the other position. So what you end up with is, okay, somebody did something that more or less equates to what we all think of as the job that a shooting guard did, 48 minutes, and the other guy did something that we all sort of agree is what a small forward generally does for 48 minutes. And people can make all these arguments about, like, positionless basketball, look at Golden State, etc. Except the thing is, they weren't playing positionless basketball. They were playing Draymond Green at center. It's not like they just threw Draymond Green out there and they said, we're not playing a center. Because when Timothy Mozgov marched down the other side, somebody had to defend him, right? When it came time to attack the basket, somebody had to go grab offensive rebounds. Somebody had to post up players, etc. Like, they were playing a small guy at that position, and the reason they were able to do that is because it turns out Draymond Green has arms that are like the length of Ohio, and so you can actually put him down there and he can still grab rebounds, and he can still contest shots, and he can still do all the things that we expect a center to do. But it's not positionless basketball. Just because a small guy's doing it doesn't mean it's not a position.
Yeah, even if people don't think he looks like a power forward, if they look at his numbers without knowing what he physically looks like, doesn't that look like a power forward numbers? He blocks shots, exactly. He grabs rebounds.
Yeah, and it's always one of those things, like Reggie Evans is like 6'6" or something, but the man's never played shooting guard, right? He's always been a power forward. So anyway, I went through and I looked at the numbers, and I used some data from David Barry, who does a lot of like analysis on this, and essentially applied an algorithm because, again, we can't watch every game. So the algorithm decides, like, for example, on the Bucks, that Giannis actually spent 70% of his time at power forward and 30% of his time at small forward. And that changes his production, because his production becomes less valuable. Like, if he puts up the numbers he did as a small forward, he looks really good. But if he puts up the same numbers as a power forward, he looks, well, he's a good rebounder, but not a great rebounder. And things change, right? So after applying all of that, the numbers changed a lot. And now, pretty much, if you sum up the total of expected wins throughout the site, it's very, very, very close to the actual total of 1,230 wins that we have in any given 82-game season. So I logged on today, and I see 27 people have commented on this. And I'm a little bit shocked that this is generating Well, frankly, any discussion at all, much less enough discussion to apparently start an argument.
Our commenters are very pedantic, Patrick. You should know
Well,
that
I
by
love
now.
this guy who's like, wouldn't the holy grail be to just calculate how good a player is and not do a positional adjustment?
Well,
And
that's
it's
what I wanted to ask you. Is a
well,
lot of people have that
this
sentiment.
this just pisses me off because how many times have you been in a bar and you have two guys arguing about who was better, Michael Jordan or Wilt Chamberlain or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or insert any other like amazing big man versus Michael Jordan, and it's like, well, they kind of did different things, right? I mean, clearly, Wilt Chamberlain got a lot more rebounds than Michael Jordan did. And clearly, Wilt Chamberlain blocked a lot more shots, even if they're not in the box score, than Michael Jordan did, right? Or even if you take two guys in the modern era, right? It's like, who's better, LeBron James or Stephen Curry? Well, I'll just say that Stephen Curry would probably suck if you played him at power forward. And LeBron James probably wouldn't be as good at point guard as Stephen Curry is. Stefan, sorry. I keep doing that, don't I? So, like, how can you possibly say, oh, you know, we don't, position doesn't matter. We just need to have an argument about who's better. Okay, well, why don't you tell me, dude, who's better, Steph Curry or LeBron James? Go. I mean,
Right.
there is no way to have that argument without doing a bunch of ridiculous mental gymnastics about who does what for their team. You have to have a player adjustment, right? And you could say, I think LeBron James is more valuable because it's harder to find guys who can play both power forward and small forward. And you can say that, and I think that's a pretty legitimate thing to say, and that makes total sense. But you can't say LeBron James is better than Steph Curry because he gets more rebounds and he shoots like a higher percentage of like under the basket. Those would be ridiculous arguments because
So at the most basic level for
rebounds a game, right? You can't say LeBron's better because he gets more triple doubles because Steph Curry doesn't rebound. He's not asked to rebound, nor as a coach would I want him to be rebounding a lot because in general, when I have guys like Draymond Green who are going to grab me rebounds, I want Steph Curry to be already on his way to half court, ready to get a pass from Draymond Green. I don't
You
want
had some
Steph
bad
Curry-
luck actually with that example because Curry is actually one of the best rebounding point guards.
Yeah, that's the thing. But that's why a position adjustment matters.
Right.
He's a great rebounder for a point guard.
So that's what I was going to ask is,
He's not going to compare, his rebounding numbers are never going to compare to LeBron James or Tyson Chandler's, nor do they need to be. They only need to compare well to other point guards because you're asking Steph Curry to do things on the court that win you games, things that point guards do. Whereas if you asked Tyson Chandler to do those same things, your team would lose a lot of games. But that doesn't make Tyson Chandler like worse, right? That doesn't mean Tyson Chandler isn't an extremely valuable player. It just means you shouldn't play him at point guard. Just like you shouldn't start Steph Curry at center. And you can talk about positionless basketball all you want, but at the end of the day, if you played a team of 5 Steph Currys, you'd probably lose against a team of 5 LeBron Jameses because underneath the basket would be a war zone with lots of little bits and pieces of bloody Steph Currys laying all over the place. Right?
yeah.
So I don't understand that. Like, I get if you want to have arguments about how the position adjustment is hard and presents problems, because sometimes you have situations where, for example, Magic Johnson is 6'9" and he's playing point guard, but if you had some ridiculous height-based algorithm saying he was playing power forward, his production would look different, right? And I get it. Yeah, that's totally a problem. But you know, since we can't watch all of the games, I'd rather have some algorithm that I know, where I know exactly how the algorithm is allocating positions, and if I need to, I can correct for that, and I can look at the Lakers and I can say, well, yeah, but these numbers are kind of different because Magic's not really playing power forward here. He's playing mostly point guard, right? Whereas if you were just doing things based on how you or I or random observer decides to allocate positions, then things get really tricky because it's hard to adjust my position data based on the fact that, well, I think Brian's crazy and this guy didn't play power forward, so.
Always adjust based on me being crazy.
So I get if there's problems, like people who, you know, think the position allocation has problems, I will say you're totally right. The people who think that you don't need a position adjustment, I will say you're totally crazy.
So there, a few people did say that. They said I'd just rather look at ADJP 48,
Yeah, but if you
than
did that, all the
WP48.
centers look like the best players.
Well, that's what I
And
was going to ask is what would the difference be? Like, who would get favored and disfavored? How would that look?
well, so I mean that's like some of the worst centers would look like perfectly average basketball players if you did that.
Just because they rebound so much,
Just because they
basically.
get lots of rebounds
Yeah.
and their shooting percentage is going to be higher because they're shooting under the basket all the time. You know, they don't turn the ball over because they don't handle the ball very much. Like, you know, an average center, if you didn't have a position adjustment, would look amazing. Like he would look like an amazing player.
So now this is starting to come together a lot more for me. So
Yeah, and then you get in these ridiculous scenarios where, like, if I had a person who did not apply a position adjustment, who was trying to build a basketball team, well, he'd probably give me a team full of power forwards and centers, and then I would lose 50 games because I wouldn't have a guy who can bring up the ball. I wouldn't have guys who can shoot three. I wouldn't have guys that can defend the pick and roll on the perimeter, and on and on and on and on and on. Right?
So right now, if with the position adjustment for these stats, you know, on Boxscore Geeks, the top point guards, you know, Chris Paul and Steph Curry, they have similar wins produced to the top centers, DeAndre Jordan and Andre Drummond. You're saying if the position adjustment was gone, they'd be like a mediocre center in terms of production. So that's why it's not useful to
because
compare.
The average center produced an AGP 48 of about 340.340, but the average point guard is like .260. So in other words, if without that position adjustment, you could basically subtract about .100 from wins produced.
So are there any arguments to saying, well, if we just changed our whole thinking paradigm even more, maybe it would be useful that, you know, guards just aren't that good, and if we could just figure that out, we could go along with this.
So here's the thing. Like, okay, this is an interesting train of thought. So the whole guards aren't that good. I think that's what Golden State is trying to do, is basically it's trying to say, well, usually guards aren't that good because they don't shoot very efficiently, etc. Unless, of course, you decide that your guards have the green light to shoot as many threes as they want, and suddenly they become crazy efficient. And then you can, like, then on the flip side of it, you have them saying, well, you can't field a team full of power forwards and centers because they wouldn't be able to defend the perimeter and all those crazy threes that the guards are shooting. Unless, of course, you decided to do positionless basketball where you try to find guys like Draymond Green and Andre Iguodala that can defend power forwards and centers and threes, and then you can switch a lot on the perimeter, and suddenly guarding the pick and roll becomes a lot better because when you switch on the perimeter, you don't end up scenarios with like David Lee guarding a really quick, guard who can shoot threes, right?
Got him benched. It got him benched.
It did through pretty much no fault of his own, but I mean, what I'm saying is like what the Warriors tried to do is exploit that paradigm by saying, well, maybe I need guards that can rebound a little better and things like that, and are a little taller and have a little more length and height and shoot more efficiently. And maybe I need power forwards and centers that are a little quicker on their feet and they can defend out to the perimeter. Maybe I'm moving the power forwards and the centers just a little bit more towards that guard position without going so far that they become huge defensive liabilities with defending really giant people. And maybe I need to move those guards and point guards, you know, keep guys on the floor who are better rebounding and stuff, again, without moving so far in that direction that I have these, you know, clunky, big, slow guys on the perimeter who can't defend. And turns out finding guys that are in that sweet spot of like 6'8" to 6'9" and can defend big guys, but are also quick enough to move and defend little guys. Turns out those guys generally make all NBA teams and are really, really good and really, really hard to find, right? Of course, that's the zen of everyone, but those guys don't exist because there's like 10 of them on the planet, right? And their names are like LeBron James and Andre Iguodala and Draymond Green and Kevin Durant, etc., right? Those guys are obscenely hard to find.
Wow, so position adjustment.
Most of the guys at that height range, they're kind of like Tristan Thompson, who's like kind of this, nuts to dog on him. I think he's a great player, but he's very sort of one-ish dimensional, right? He's a bruiser, a rebounder, and he gets rebounds and he gets efficient baskets by putbacks, etc. But he wouldn't be very good. Like, he does not have the skills that Draymond Green has in terms of A, on the offense, stretching the defense by being able to shoot threes, and B, defensively, he's not nearly as good at defending small guys on the perimeter. Like, that's what most guys in that tweener size are like. Or you flip the other way and you have a guy like Ryan Anderson, who's like, he's like 6'9" or so, and he can shoot a lot of threes, but he's not a very good defender down in the post, and he's not a great shot blocker or defender, and, you know, kind of an average-ish rebounder.
Oh, that is a good segue to the second part of this, if you're ready for it.
Sure.
The second part is, and this is what I posted in the comments, so of course I'm very biased towards bringing it up, but the Ari Caroline article from 2013, where he calculates position, how does that fit into all this?
Well, see, and here we get into this problem where I think, so the premise of Ari Caroline's piece there is, so rather than looking at how tall somebody is or what position they're listed at in the box score, let's look at what they do.
Right.
And let's assume the guy who gets the most rebounds and the most block shots and shoots the highest efficiency from two, etc., that's probably the center. Regardless of what the box score says or how tall he is, that guy's probably the center. And then the guy next who's, not quite as good but doing a lot of that stuff, that's probably the power forward. And then the guy who's getting like all the steals and the assists, that guy's probably the point guard. He kind of goes through that exercise, right? Which I think totally has merit, because at the end of the day, what it's all about is, regardless of what five people you put out onto the floor, the whole point of basketball is, I need a guy who's going to get rebounds. I need a guy who's going to defend the rim. I need a guy who's going to get some steals. I need a guy who's going to pass the ball and like enable other players in the offense. And ideally, I'd have like all five guys can do all five of those things, right? But that's usually not the way it works. So yeah, it could totally be that you have a guy who's like 6'8" that's doing all the things that normally a center would, and you say, okay, well, that's my center, regardless of what the coach wrote into the box score. And I think that makes a lot of sense, but I don't think it's entirely. First of all, I don't think it's entirely fair, I guess is the word, because then you got situations, well, what about Magic Johnson, who got a lot of rebounds, right? Was he playing center? Because I don't really think he was playing center, right? And he shot really efficiently, like his field goal percentage was some like absurd number, like 65% or something. I don't think he was playing center, right? Is it fair to Magic Johnson to label him the center just because, he did all these things that centers do really well? Another good example is like LeBron James. Like, he often led his team in assists. Was he the point guard? I mean, you could kind of make an argument that he was the point guard, but was he really? I don't know. Is it fair to say he's the point guard? Or is he a small forward who just passes the ball really well? And then you get into situations like, well, if you're doing it this way, then isn't it hard? So it becomes hard to say who's bad at their job. For instance, if you trot out a power forward who's a great rebounder and great out of the basket, and so Ari's numbers said, well, this guy must be the center because he's really great at all these other things, and you have a starting center who's not very good at all those things, but his algorithm says, well, this guy must be the power forward. So what you really have is a center who's not very good at his job, but getting credit for being a good power forward, and a power forward who's great at his job, but not getting quite as good credit for that because the algorithm thinks he's a center. You know what I mean?
So for those looking at the graph right now,
it's making the underperformers look better and the overperformers look worse.
Right, and I'll share this for you, Patrick. So if you're looking at this graph right now, two guys that jump out on it are Sean Marion and Zach Randolph. They are like super good rebounders for being forwards, so they're like way jumping off the line here. It's kind of interesting.
One of my favorite examples is Mike Miller, who is a shooting guard, but he could rebound the ball, especially defensively, right? And so is he, like, the algorithm would say, well, he must be the small forward, right? Because look at all those rebounds. Well, maybe he's just really good at it, at the shooting guard position. And then whoever's ever playing shooting small forward who's not getting those rebounds, the algorithm is saying, well, he must be playing shooting guard. When what you really have is, okay, well, maybe there's a small forward who's not very good at rebounding playing with a shooting guard who's really good at rebounding. And now the algorithm is kind of making the one look worse and the other look better. And it may also be option 3, that because the coach is trying to play positionless basketball, that they're both really 2.5s.
Yeah.
Right? And that is a totally legitimate argument. Like, I hate to like use a terribly overused cliche quote, but to me, like wins produce is like this incredibly flawed metric, but it's the best one we have
Yep.
because most of the other flawed metrics are. I think the wins produced formula is flawed because we don't have perfect inputs. All of the other formulas are pretty flawed because they just do complete utter nonsense with the inputs they have. Like somewhere along in the chain, they do something fantastically stupid with the inputs, and out comes a number that and is just intrinsically flawed. Whereas I feel like the wins produced formula, it has a bunch of flaws because the inputs are imperfect, and you could try to address those by making the inputs better. But I think trying to get rid of the position adjustment is like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's a terrible idea.
You've definitely convinced me pretty well on this segment. Good job, Patrick. I
Yeah,
learned a lot.
I
I'm
think
glad
I'm
we brought it
preaching a
up.
little bit to the choir here.
No, I mean, look, I don't know a lot about math compared to you guys, so I like to hear about this stuff.
Yeah, to me, this is not math. This is just kind of common sense, right? It's just like kind of thinking about basketball and who does what, and the things that a power forward and a center do are extremely valuable towards winning. Like, it turns out like grabbing all of your defensive rebounds and grabbing a good chunk of the offensive rebounds that are available is really valuable to winning. But you cannot put 5 guys out there that can all do it because there's only one ball.
And you need to compare them to each other. It's not useful to compare to the other guys.
Even though I can't put 5 guys out there that all do that because there's only one ball, I still have to put 5 players out there. So I need to do something useful with the other 3 players, right? And it turns out those useful things I do with the other 3 players are going to be different things that, while in an absolute sense they don't contribute as much to winning, I still have to put somebody out there that does it. So in a relative sense, they're extremely valuable.
Okay,
I don't know if that made anything.
It does, and I have a follow-up question based on that. So does that mean that if you've got, again, the best point guard, Chris Paul or Steph Curry, and you look at the wins produced gap or points over par or whatever between them and, say, the 5th ranked guy or the 10th ranked guy, does that mean that that's a smaller gap than between the top centers and the 5th and 10th ranked centers because of that position adjustment? Okay, good. Explain why.
Okay. Well, again, because there's a position adjustment, right? So, I mean, so
it's built into the adjustment.
So one of the reasons Chris Paul is so good, for example, is he grabs so many rebounds, he racks up so many assists while producing few turnovers, right? And those are absolute numbers. Like those things would be.
So he just gets compared absolutely to other point guards. That makes
correct.
sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's
good segment.
I think Dave's better at explaining this than I am. But,
no, you did a really good job.
Let's move on to the wall of boredom, shall we?
Yeah, this will be
short. The wall
short.
of boredom is this part of the show where we talk about what's been happening in the off season, and we call it the wall of boredom because in that part of the off season where all of the big decisions have been made, and now the things that, like, if we go to the ESPN.com transactions page, we see a whole lot of not really very much exciting going on. So it looks like the Rio Grande, which is the team that I think was featured on Grantland or some other. It's that team it's Daryl Morey's pet team, right? The one that just shoots like 83s a game or something like that, right?
Something like that.
They've signed a new coach, and then apparently they're going to be shooting even more threes. Which
hopefully,
like I don't know how they're going to squeeze them in. I don't know what they're going to do, but I mean they're taking the whole like 7 seconds or less concept, and they're just taking it to a crazy extreme. And I think this is really interesting because like people have been talking for a couple of years about how this the 3-point revolution in the NBA. But if you look at it, look at the way like the Warriors shot threes. It's pretty much exactly the same thing that D'Antoni was doing in the aughts, right? In the mid aughts.
Yeah, Alvin Gentry during the celebration said, "D'Antoni, this is for you." Like he dedicated it to him.
If you look at the number of threes they put up per game, it's pretty much the D'Antoni 7 seconds or less offense. It's not revolutionary yet. So where I think it's going to be, so they averaged like 33s a game or something like that? 33.
The Warriors?
Yeah.
I'll look it up.
And I don't think they led the NBA. I think the Houston Rockets led the NBA in threes per game.
Yeah, I want to say the Warriors are around fifth or seventh, something like that in
Right.
attempts.
And here's the thing, like it's not we're not really gonna know. So all of the data that we've crunched says that even at this level, teams still aren't shooting enough from the 3-point line. Like, I mean, you basically, I think if you took all of the bad mid-range shots, and teams still shoot a lot of them, like, the ones between 18 and 24 feet or so, every single one of those shots, if you converted them to a three, would be better. And people are always talking about, oh, well, yeah, but if you did that, people would be contesting it.
But let's find out.
That's exactly it. So here's the thing. People are saying if I did that, then the defense would adjust and they would contest that 3-point line because they would not have to defend that gap, right, in the mid-range. And so my 3-point shooting percentage would go down. To which I answer, don't care, right? Because if you do the math, like even the best in the NBA, the best shooters in the NBA, they're shooting like low 40s from that like 20-foot range. Translate that to what I need to shoot from behind the arc to have the same expected points per shot, and it's like high 20s or low 30s, which is well below the average NBA player's 3-point shooting efficiency. And so if as a coach I start saying, well, I don't really give a shit if you can shoot well from the mid-range, that's not going to be something I'm prioritized. I'd rather have a player who's a little bit less athletic, but he can shoot better from the 3-point range. And I start building my teams like that. And if I get to the point where I'm shooting 50 or 60 3-point shots a game, like what will my offensive efficiency look like? And I think it's just like you said. It's like, let's find out. No one's ever even tried, right? And I'm looking forward to the first team that tries and finding out what that looks like. And
Maybe the Rio Grande Vipers.
And it really does amaze me that nobody takes one of these crappy, shitty teams that's going nowhere and says, what the hell, let's find out, right?
So, that's glad you brought that up.
If I'm coaching the Philadelphia 76ers, like, in the best of all best worlds, like, even with my improvement from Jahlil Okafor, assuming he's a decent player, right? I'm going to win, like, 25 games if I, like, get lucky, right? Why don't I just throw out an offense like this and find out? Wouldn't it be amazing if
So, Patrick, we do have the attempts up on screen right now, and you're right. Houston was number one at 32.7 attempts per game, so maybe half of what you actually want.
Start seeing that number get to 50 and up.
Then
you start talking about revolutions.
The also thing is they were way ahead. They were over 5 threes ahead of number 2 Cleveland, who's only 27.5.
Which is also kind of a number that shocks everybody, right? Because you think of Cleveland, you're thinking guys like Thompson and Mozgov and Variajo and like who's shooting.
Their pace is slower, but they still take lots of threes.
Turns out Kyrie Irving shoots a lot of threes, and Kevin Love shoots a lot of threes, and LeBron James shoots a lot of threes.
So this is one of the least scientific ways you can do it, but if you're looking at this screen right now, anyone watching the video show, it's a pretty strong correlation, right?
And this doesn't quite
attempts with winning.
Right?
Number 1, Houston. You have then Cleveland 2, Portland 3. Golden State is 4. I shortchanged them a little bit.
Yeah, but look at Philadelphia at number 6.
Well, so that's why I brought this up, is that these are all good teams that win, except for Philadelphia, the one crappy team.
Thing is, this doesn't adjust for pace. Because if if you adjust for pace, Philadelphia is way at the top, right? So even though they are they are number 6, they are not nearly number 6 in terms of 3 shot per 100 possessions, right? They're just an absolute amount attempts per game.
That's a good point.
I think if you adjust it for pace, it would have a positive but not necessarily super strong relationship with winning.
We'll find that stat. I know it's on Nylon Calculus or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
But anyway, so that's the Rio Grande. Like I said, someday somebody's actually going to try to have a team shooting 50 or more threes a game in the NBA. And I want to see what happens when that happens, because I bet they would be a crazy hard team to defend.
Yeah.
Okay, and then lastly in the Wall of Boredom, we saw that JaVale McGee has been signed by the Mavs, right?
That's right.
And this evoked lots of laughter and possibly crying from Mavs fans. And because, like, the thing about JaVale McGee, he might be on Shaqtin' a Fool every week, and he totally does do some crazy, stupid shit all the time. But it turns out he's actually pretty productive. Like, it turns out that even with all the stupid things he does, he's pretty good basketball player, right? He still does a lot of things that turn out to be really important. Like for every goaltending he makes, he blocks a couple of shots, right? And it's actually interesting. I once asked Dave to try and figure out what the correlation, like what impact on wins does goaltending have, because my instinct is that it's negative, right? That essentially committing a goaltending act is worse than a turnover, would be my instinct. So
Oh,
and,
interesting.
and wins produced does not account for that, because I don't think goaltending is counted as a turnover or a missed shot or any other like sort of terrible thing.
It's just counted
Yeah,
as a made basket.
yeah. Well, but my point is the guy who committed the goaltending offense doesn't get any penalty in the box score for it, right?
Mm.
Not, at least not with the formula. Whereas I think it should, right? Because essentially, anytime I commit goaltending, I've turned a shot that had that had some field goal percentage into a shot that has a 100% field goal percentage. It seems like a very bad thing. And JaVale McGee is like the king of committing goaltending offenses, right? So I think
You
it
should
is
look
kind
at
of,
that one
I
day.
think it is kind of hard to measure. Like, okay, how, like, sure, he blocks 4 shots, 5 shots per 48 minutes, but he also commits goaltending like twice. Like, does that wash? And I suspect it might wash. So, but I think, anyway, I think JaVale McGee has definite potential. Like, even for the stupid shit he does, and especially working with a guy like Rick Carlisle, I think there could be something. I think this is a good signing, especially at this price.
Yeah, and we've got his numbers up right here, his wins produced numbers. So I didn't realize this. He actually hasn't been good since 2012, 2013. He's gotten very few minutes the last 2 years, so he's
Yeah,
probably been hurt.
he got injured and then
Yeah,
just kind of never came back. He never got the trust of any coaches. Um,
but he's
he
still
never
relatively young, so
he
good.
got
Hopefully you
injured
get come back,
early. I
with
think
you.
it was early in Brian Shaw's first season, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, just never came back. And then the final thing we wanted to talk about, because we're an economics centered blog, we're going to talk a little bit about arena subsidies, and in particular a man who's running for president, who has presided and worked hard for a $400 million arena subsidy. We're talking about, of course, about Scott Walker. Scott Walker is running for president, and he's running on some kind of a crazy, like, fiscally conservative agenda, right? Let's forget all the social issues that aren't really part of the blog. Let's just talk economics. He's running on very much on like we're going to clean up Washington, we're going to be fiscally responsible, etc. This is the guy who not only like signed this bill, but also pushed it really hard, pushed his state into giving a $400 million arena subsidy for the Milwaukee Bucks. And when you look at who benefits the most from that, it turns out to be guys who belong to a super PAC that have contributed to his presidential campaign. What is going on here, Wisconsin? Wisconsin, why you gotta be like that? Like, I've said this before, like, I'm really proud. I miss the NBA like crazy. I really wish the NBA was in Seattle. But I'm really proud that when it came time to pony up a new arena, or the Sonics would move to Oklahoma and become the Thunder, the Seattle voters just basically said, hey man, don't let the door hit your ass on the way out. We're not paying for your arena. And that is the way all cities should basically treat their major sports owners. When it comes time to say, well, you either pay for a new arena or we're going to move, taxpayers should be like, then move, bitch. We don't need you. Because this ain't creating no jobs. This is not helping us. Like, giving the Milwaukee Bucks $400 million, along with, I'm sure, a whole host of crazy incentives in that contract that will commit Wisconsin to paying for more shit in the future. That's just, all that really is just bending over for the rich guys, right? I mean, the voters of Wisconsin, and I think this is statewide, just voted to give a bunch of billionaires $400 million to build a stadium. Why would you do that? The billionaires do not need your help. And why are we letting Scott Walker, like, get away with pushing this through his Congress without giving him all kinds of shit about how he basically screwed over all of the voters in his state.
Yeah, and this specific
Like,
allegation here, I'll quote from the Bloomberg article real fast. Through a limited liability corporation registered under his son's name, Buck's co-owner, John Hams, or Hams, excuse me, I don't know the pronunciation, on May 27th, donated $150,000 to the Super Political Action Committee backing Walker, according to state and federal records. So there you go.
well, yeah. And is Hams? Is that a beer? Is there a beer? Is that the guy that owns the beer?
No, that's Hamm, just Ham. Hams,
Oh, okay.
yeah. I don't think it has an E at the
Really?
end.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't know about Midwest
I
beer,
don't-
so
I don't-
commenters, blow us
I-
up on this beer question here.
I grew up there, and I feel like I remember a Ham's beer. Like I feel like that's one of the ones with there's always like a bear with a fish or something on the can.
yeah. Let's. Well, I'll bring up an image of a Ham's beer can for us here. But go ahead,
Yeah,
Patrick.
this is what happens during the off season, folks. We got no basketball to talk about. We can talk a little bit about the WNBA, and we will be soon. But otherwise, there's not a lot going on. So we talk. Yeah, it's a bear. I knew there was a bear, but the fish was wrong. There's some kind of like. That must be some other beer. There's some beer that's always like this, got these really crazy, elaborate paintings of like wildlife and stuff. Actually, they look really beautiful if I remember them correctly. But this is not it. So
This
anyway, I don't
Ham's
know,
kid birthday book is kind of cool. We're showing here.
we've talked about this topic a million times.
Yeah, we don't need to go on
Arenas
this.
Do not make money for taxpayers. They don't like economically subsidize anything. And by the way, even if they did, most of you in Wisconsin don't live in Milwaukee, so what the hell? But they don't. They don't promote any local like. They don't create jobs. They don't create economic prosperity. They don't create business opportunities for, the average folk. Sure, they create great opportunities for the few people that happen to be quote unquote lucky enough to own land right around where the arena is going to be built. And I'm putting lucky in quotes there because there's a reason why those people want the arena to be built in the first place. But it just pretty much just takes money from one area and like relocates the money to another area. It doesn't create any value for anybody. And second of all, it's like these are rich people. They don't need your money. This is why like every time there's a lockout or a strike and the owners talk about how they can't make money, we have to just laugh at them because literally the state is paying your bills. How can you not make money? It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this over and over again, but I mean, we have to because it's such a valence issue, right? That's a political
Right.
word. Sorry for using it. But what it means is everyone agrees. Us left-wing guys are spouting off about it. I've got the New York Times article up here saying, the Cato Institute, which is a right, think tank, they're against it. It's just a cash grab
Right.
by a few people, basically.
But let's also be clear, there are some, other than the owners, the obvious winners, there are some other winners. And those are the people who really love basketball and derive enormous value. What they're basically saying is there's like, let's say there's 50,000 huge NBA fans. Instead of saying, well, why don't all you 50,000 people pony up 40 million? They're saying, well, let's have the whole state pony up 40 million, 400 million. And so those 50,000 people, they're like, that's a windfall for them, right? Because they should be paying a lot more for the privilege of keeping their team in town if they love it that much.
That's true, and that's how politics works, right? Whoever is the most active and involved is going to reap the benefits.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how many people live in Wisconsin. What's it, like 10 million maybe? So,
We can look that up, too.
This is essentially like it's as if somebody took $40 out of each one of your pockets. Right? And a lot of you can't really afford to just take. I mean, that's what I'm saying is like if there were 1 million people in Wisconsin who love the NBA and would be willing to pay $400 a piece to keep them in Milwaukee, what each of those 1 million people did is they made somebody else pay like $360 instead of having them paying $400. That's what just happened, right? There was this crazy wealth transfer of, $360 from all of you who don't give a shit about the NBA to those 1 million people who love the NBA so much they were willing to pay $400 million. That's what just happened.
And for the
And
record,
that's with made up numbers of 10 million people living in
right,
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin has 5.7 million people in
So the numbers are
2014. There's the
probably
20th
worse.
most populous state.
It's
Yeah.
probably more like if you live in Wisconsin and you don't give a shit about the NBA, somebody just made you pay $1,000 to somebody else in Wisconsin who loves the NBA. That's what just happened, basically. I mean, if you think about it this way, right? That's exactly what just happened.
I love those kind of breakdowns. That was good.
Yeah, and I think if it had been sold that way, a lot of people in Wisconsin would be like, "What? No, I don't want to do that." Because most of them would be like, "Well, if we were talking about the Packers, then I'd get involved."
Yeah.
All right, so that's pretty much all we wanted to talk about this week, and some of us have got to go eat dinner. So I'm gonna wrap this show by doing a shout out, and I know Brian wants to too. I'll give you a chance to in a second, but my shout out today is, and some of you people are going to think it's sarcastic, but it is not. My shout out this week is to Flip Saunders, because Flip, it turns out last week, Flip revealed to the public that he is suffering Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a form of cancer. And I just want to say, like, for all the bad things I say about you, man, it was only basketball. There's never anything personal involved. Cancer sucks. Cancer is the worst. Fuck cancer. And I really, really, really hope that Flip just gives cancer a serious beatdown. My thoughts and wishes go out to you because as much as I don't like the way you coach basketball, man, nobody deserves to, have life hit them hard in that kind of way. And I really, really wish all the best to Flip and really hope that, like I said, I hope he gives cancer a serious beatdown.
Yeah.
That's my shout out for this week.
That's an excellent shout out. Yeah, I love that one. Yeah, mine are pretty fast too. So the first is I'm going to give also a non-sarcastic shout out, pro Lakers shout out that I noticed a few days ago. Let me get this article up here, and that is that Lakers. yeah, Lakers holding a big 14-player workout featuring guard prospects, and I don't know if it's happened yet or how this actually went, but what this made
is just like an open tryout, or was this 14 invites?
That's a good question. I don't know, but somewhere in the article it probably says we'll have a link for that. And so the reason what this made me think of is, our old co-host Arturo, he wrote a series of articles on his old blog, not his current one, but his old one from way before Wages of Wins, called "Build Me a Winner," and it's sort of like his template for what he would do if he was, consulting.
Which we pretty much entirely agree with.
And we love all that stuff.
Yep. This is my big thing where I'm always ranting about how teams totally misuse roster spots 9 through 15. It's all about the Build Me a Winner template, which is the Build Me a Winner template is saying, find me as many 18, 19-year-olds as you can, throw them all against the wall until I find some that are like decent. And then keep those because by the time they're 24, they're probably going to be really good, right? That's what essentially the Build Me a Winner template is.
Yeah, and that's one of his bullet points.
If you're pretty decent when you're 18 or 19, you're probably going to be amazing when you're 24.
Yeah, instead of, getting that $1 million veteran that's been around for 8 years on the end of the bench, hold these big tryouts and, find out and keep stats for them and do all that. And the Lakers aren't going quite far, but they're in the spirit of Arturo's Build Me a Winner, so good job on the Lakers for this one, at least. And
the Lakers getting a shout out on this show. That's kind of
and I got one more, and this is kind of a follow up more than a shout out, I guess. And this goes back to the the esports stuff we had last week. One of the things that Dre pointed out, we went back and forth a little on comparing Dota 2 and esports leagues to real sports. That's where the poll question came from originally, of course. And one of the things that he pointed out is that people do have career-ending esports injuries. And carpal tunnel, tendonitis, all that. And I came across a tweet after that show that reminded me of what Dre was talking about, and I'll bring this up right now too. And this is from Clinton Loomis, also known as E.G. Fear. We talked about him a little bit last week. He's the captain of Team EG, which won the International this year, and he was featured as being one of the main guys on the documentary Free to Play. And in that documentary, he, is said to be the old school North American legend, beloved figure, did kind of well and redeemed himself in 2013, didn't quite go all the way. And, when I finally watched that movie, I'm thinking, man, well, he retired in 2014. He sat out, became a coach, I think, something like that. You have to apologize, Dota fans. I don't follow it really, so I'm trying to bring everyone up to speed.
All
but
together from the movie, right? Yeah.
Right, and so when I finally saw him win it this year, I'm like, man, this is great. I thought he had retired. He must have beaten that injury. Good for him. But as you guys watching the video show can see up on this tweet, no, that didn't happen. He's trying to get surgery now right after the event. Apparently it's still
so
bad.
When he says
so
eligible, he means it like medically or
must be some kind of an insurance thing, or I don't know. I couldn't
that's what
find
I'm trying
any
to figure.
context.
Is it the kind of thing where the doctor is going to tell him whether or not the surgery will even help?
That's right.
Or is it the kind of thing where he's going to be like, will my insurance pay for this surgery?
Either way, this is kind of, I'm not going to say it's sad to see this tweet, but, kind of a sign of what he's going through.
How's that not sad?
Well, he did just win millions of dollars.
Well, no, but for a guy at the pinnacle of his profession to maybe put in a position where he can't do it anymore, I think that's sad. I think that's totally sad.
Well, we'll see. I don't think
just because he's already made millions doesn't mean he's like immune to.
Yeah.
Sadness.
No, I mean this is just a tweet. I don't think this means that he's retiring or anything. It's just that he clearly had to sacrifice to win that tournament is all.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So yeah, that was my other follow-up.
Good shout-outs. Good shout-outs. I think we're done for the week, right? We're done. We're going to get out of here. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you, Brian, for doing such a wonderful job in the lovely Hollywood studios. And
Burbank, yeah.
Burbank, or where? You live in San Francisco, don't you? I mean, come on.
That's right. Lovely Emeryville, California.
All right. Anyway, well, thank you all for listening, and we will see you again next week.